So March 1996, Tupac does an interview with Source magazine where he claims that he slept with Faith Evans, Biggie's wife. And of course, his wife, Faith Evans, says that never happened. But Charlie Baltimore said that at the time, Biggie did initially believe it, but eventually she thinks he didn't anymore. In May of 1996, Tupac pleads guilty to the illegal weapons charges when weapons were found in his vehicle when he was pulled over for speeding. But supposedly the charges were going to be dropped if he did a concert to support inner city kids. June 1st, 1996, Death Row is investigated for a firearms violation and for taxes. Then the next day, according to the FBI report, there was a meeting between LAPD and Death Row to discuss dissatisfaction with armed security personnel and the use of off-duty police officers. So I'm guessing LAPD was not a fan of them using their own officers as private bodyguards. Just a couple days later, on June 4th, Tupac releases How Do You Want It and Hit 'Em Up, a 2-single album. And if you haven't heard Hit 'Em Up, it is clearly aimed at Biggie, especially the first line, I F your B, you fat mother effer. Why won't this app just let me say a swear word? This was also the first track that the new version of Outlaws was featured on, and then after this, they added Rufus Cooper to the group. And of course, we should know by now that any song, any art, anything that comes out that seems specifically directed and pointed at one individual does really well, because people are nosy, like myself. We're curious, we want to know, we love the tea. It's the only reason I'm excited for Joshua Bassett's album to come out. I won't deny it. So this album did really well. But unfortunately, when actual violence and gangs are involved, it's not just like fun and games marketing anymore. It's actually very serious and can lead to very bad things. July 23rd, 1996, Biggie's arrested for drug and weapon charges. Supposedly, it started when police knocked on his door because they wanted somebody to move their car who was parked illegally. Then they smelled something that smelled like herbs or incense. Something. I don't know what. Something. And they came into the house and they found that thing and also a couple weapons that had serial numbers that were scratched off of them, so might have been stolen. August 27th, 1996, Tupac is filming for Gang Related, a movie, and that night he goes to the studio to record some music. And that studio was Death Row, of course. And afterwards, he asked one of his friends to go and get the tapes from them so that he could listen to them back. But when his friend tried, the Death Row lawyer said absolutely not and would not let him have them. And this really pissed Tupac off. And then he decided to fire Kenner, the Death Row lawyer, as his personal lawyer, which a lot of people around him said they thought was a horrible move because it really put him on the wrong side of the list for Death Row. So September 7th, 1996, there's a Mike Tyson fight, and Suge Knight is planning on hosting an after party for it at his Las Vegas club. And of course, Tupac was supposed to go, but last minute he said he needed to deal with some family stuff in Atlanta, so he wouldn't be able to attend. Also, this is all supposedly, and supposedly his friend said Suge convinced him to stay and go. So after the fight, they were in the MGM Grand, and they saw a guy named Orlando Anderson. Here he is. And he was a known member of the Crips. A friend of Tupac and a member of Death Row's claimed that Orlando stole a company medallion from him. And remember, Death Row was heavily associated with the Bloods gang as well. So Tupac, Suge Knight, and the rest of Death Row that were there all chased Orlando down and beat him up until the security guards got in the way. Supposedly, after this, Tupac went back to his hotel and then met back up with Suge and the rest of Death Row to go to the nightclub. Now, apparently, Tupac's mother said that she was told that Tupac wanted to ride in his own car, but Suge said that they had some stuff to discuss, so Tupac rode with him, and that they also rode without any bodyguards, which is not really normal for people of this status. So Suge Knight is driving and Tupac is riding passenger, and they stop at a red light, and at this red light, a man in a white Cadillac pulls up beside them and shoots Tupac 4 times, and a bullet grazes Suge Knight's head as well. And apparently afterwards, Suge Knight actually continued driving. He said he was looking for a hospital, but the cops flagged him down and had him stop. And of course, Tupac went to the ER immediately. He had a shattered lung. And it turns out that Suge Knight, he said that it was lodged in his head, the bullet, but it turns out it just grazed his head, supposedly. But he also said that while he was visiting Tupac in the hospital, Tupac said he loved him. And it was also said that Tupac had to be resuscitated multiple times during the next 6 days in the hospital. Now, the next day, September 8th, 1996, according to gang detectives in Compton at the time, Orlando Anderson was heard bragging about shooting Tupac. And I'm not sure how much we can trust this account because I haven't seen anything about him officially talking to police, so take that as you will. But according to the FBI report, he also supposedly was seen a few days after with the same kind of weapon. His cousin drove a similar car to the auto shop a couple days later, and they found the same kind of ammunition and more weapons in his cousin and uncle's home. Not great for Orlando, but the weapon and ammunition was pretty common, so I'm not sure how damning that really is. I will say, though, his uncle's name was Dwayne Davis, also went by Keefe D, and he was known to be a kingpin of the Crips, and his name will be coming back later, so please remember it. September 9th, 1996, there is a Compton PD search warrant listed on the FBI document that says that there were gang members that were associated with death row in a park in LA discussing what to do in response to Tupac's shooting. And they were saying specifically against the Crips. So I think we can safely assume, based on their death row association and that message, that they were Bloods. They also found out at that time that there was a police officer, a school police officer, that was working for death row on the side. So again, more corrupt cops. And September 13th, 1996, Tupac is pronounced dead at only 25 years old. His mother said that she eventually told them to stop resuscitation, that he was thrashing around, and that she took it as a sign that he wanted the plug pulled, that he wouldn't want to live as an invalid. Now, Biggie's response to this, according to his wife Faith, Biggie cried and was super upset when he found out, and Snoop Dogg also visited Biggie shortly after this and said he was really broken up about it. So, talking about the investigation, supposedly Vegas police did some questioning on the people in the car behind them, which were the Outlaws, but they didn't really get anywhere. And the FBI document about it also states at multiple points that cops that were known to be associated with death row or had been in the past kept butting in and trying to get information about the case. So also in the FBI document is an interesting tidbit about Tupac's case that says that somebody was known to owe someone else from death row a large amount of money and allegedly got them to peddle drugs, redacted, or they would not get paid. And supposedly this led to some artists, including Tupac, being owed a large sum of money by someone at death row and complaining and wanting to leave. And perhaps this may have been why Dre and Snoop Dogg wanted to leave. Specifically, it said that someone, redacted, but I'm going to guess Suge Knight if we're guessing, but we can't know for sure, owed Tupac a ton of royalties, like millions, and Tupac was going to leave death row and out him for not paying the royalties and for drug activities. And supposedly Tupac was also planning on taking some unreleased songs of his from death row and releasing them on his own album and getting the money for that himself. We're going to talk about theories as to Tupac's shooting. And let me say once again that I am not supporting any of these theories. I'm not telling you that I believe any of them. I am just summarizing theories that are brought forth and the evidence that they bring forth with them. So, of course, people were going to suspect Orlando Anderson, who they had beat up earlier in the night, and they say would want vengeance. He was also associated with the Crips heavily, so death row was associated with the Bloods, could tie into gang things. Other people believe that it was Suge Knight because Tupac was planning on leaving death row. Another theory was that the FBI was responsible and that later on Biggie would get shot for this exact same reason as a ploy to end the violence around their music. Other people think that Sean Combs, aka Puff, put out the hit on him because of the East Coast-West Coast feud, and possibly also tying into that party in December of 1995 where they assaulted his friend and were trying to get his address, which could only be for bad things, really. So maybe he was seeking revenge for that as well. Other people think that it was gang-related, that he somehow pissed off one of the gangs along the way and they were just done with it. We do know that some gang members did not like him rapping about gang life because he was not loyal to either the Crips or the Bloods and hung out with both of them, and they felt that that was insincere. But Death Row Records specifically was very heavily associated with the Bloods, so maybe the Crips felt that he was screwing them over and showing clear loyalty to the Bloods by signing with Death Row. And perhaps due to financially supporting Bloods and also maybe the possibility that he would share information, they decided that he needed to go. And some people say that Tupac is actually still alive and he's just away from the limelight. Suge Knight did say that a few weeks before his death, Tupac was talking about faking his own death, but I personally do think that this one is extremely unlikely, although if you'd like to put forth more evidence in the comments, feel free. And I don't want to waste the rest of this video, so September 15th, 1996, Biggie is caught smoking and charged with drug possession. October 1st, 1996, Bullet the movie is released with Tupac. And then October 2nd, 1996, Orlando Anderson was actually arrested in connection with Tupac's shooting. And supposedly there were reports that Orlando had told the police that Suge Knight was actually the initial target. October 17th, 1996, the FBI documents say that an inquiry was opened into a known organized crime figure and others sending death threats to former prominent rap musicians in LA to get money from them. Basically, they would call them, make death threats, and then call them again with other members stating that they would protect them for a fee. And they did mention specifically Tupac and Eazy-E as targeted by this scam. The FBI document also has a statement from Tupac that was in Vibe magazine. He basically said that he had never had a problem with Biggie, that him having a problem with Biggie or Suge having a problem with Puff would be like picking on your little brother, because they felt like, they loved them and they supported them and they had no problem with them getting big, but if they weren't respecting them, that's when they had a problem. He essentially felt like Biggie had gotten too big for his britches and that the money had changed him and he wanted to knock him down a peg. October 29th, 1996, Biggie and Faith Evans have their first child together, CJ. And some say they were back together at this time. Some say, including Charlie Baltimore, that he was just taking care of his responsibility as a parent. But obviously they were back together at some point because they had the kid. I don't know why I can't find this picture anywhere, but November 5th, 1996, the Don Killuminati, the 7 Day Theory album by Tupac is released. And in that album, he specifically references Haitian Jack and said that he was working for the feds and set him up. The next day, Suge Knight goes on Primetime Live and he is asked about the Tupac shooting. And when asked if he knew who shot Tupac, he said, "If I knew, I wouldn't say because it's not my job." And I think a lot of people, especially after that, really questioned if he did know why or who shot him. In late 1996, Biggie is in a car crash with Lil Cease and Charlie Baltimore. It was raining and their car flipped over the guardrail and onto an embankment. And Biggie ended up having a shattered leg. He had to get a metal rod in it and completely learn how to walk again afterwards, which is why he uses a cane from then on. December 30th of 1996, an investigation into death row and possible ties to organized crime starts. They were specifically investigating links to street gangs, drug trafficking, money laundering, violent acts, extortion, and weapon running. Specifically whether members of the Bloods were being employed by death row and whether Suge Knight specifically had any possible ties to convicted drug kingpins. They also wanted to know whether the money that was used to create death row was used from an illegal source. But for his side, Suge Knight said that this was ridiculous and they were just trying to shut down anything that was helping Black people, especially in areas like Compton. In January of 1997, Biggie didn't show up for court for the assault on the club promoter, and he gets an arrest warrant issued, but they ended up settling it in a civil case. So in January of 1997, Tupac wins the AMA for favorite rap hip-hop artist, and he also comes out in Gridlocked, the movie, which this movie also has a song by him and Snoop Dogg, Wanted Dead or Alive. In February, Suge Knight is sentenced to 9 years in jail for violating probation via his attack on Orlando Anderson. And then in early March, Biggie goes to California in order to promote his new album. And this is only 6 months after Tupac's shooting. He wanted people to know that he was okay after his car crash, and he wanted to bring peace to the East-West rivalry situation, especially after the shooting. And he was also planning on shooting the music video for Hypnotize out in LA. And he did an interview while he was there, stating once again that he had nothing to do with the shooting, that he had no malice towards Tupac whatsoever or towards the West Coast.
Some of the East Coast people took it wrong, but then like you're saying, everything in between was just personal grudges, maybe between
That's all.
people.
That's
right.
all it was to me. I never had any problem. Me and C's used to come out here all the time and ball out with everybody. Rich and Rich, Warren and Snoop. Just kick it, smoke crack.
Right.
While Biggie is there in March, Tupac wins the award for R&B Soul or Rap Album of the Year for All Eyes on Me at the Soul Train Awards. And since he was going out to California, Faith did say that he was worried. He was worried that something might happen to him because he had been kind of in a feud with Tupac at the time of his death, and that people might take it the wrong way, but he went out anyways. And it seems like he was also really optimistic that his new album would bring positive change, would kind of bring a close to everything, make people realize it wasn't important. And March 9th, 1997, Biggie was leaving the Vibe magazine Soul Train Awards after party at the Peterson Automotive Museum in LA. He was not driving, he was actually in the backseat of the car, and it was actually the second car in 3 that were driving him and his entourage. And supposedly the driver of Biggie's car didn't have a lot of security experience yet, and so he stopped at a red light, which normally, supposedly, you would not want to stop at a red light at that time of night, and especially given all that had just happened with Tupac. But they stopped at a red light, and a car pulled up next to them and shot Biggie 4 times. And the hospital did try to revive him, but he was already gone. He was 24 years old. Then in May of 1997, the police show up to Dwayne Davis, aka Keefe D's girlfriend's house, and they take his car, which happens to match the description of the shooter's car in Tupac's case. So he said that he met Biggie a couple years ago, and he was actually at the party and talking with Biggie about an hour before his death. And they also asked him about the Tupac shooting, and he said that he was not involved, but he thinks that Suge Knight did it because Tupac wanted to leave death row.